everyone, and welcome to the Case for Safety podcast. I'm your host, Scott Fowler. I appreciate you being with us today. We're going to be navigating the world of head protection, talking about regulations, how you can ensure your team has the equipment they need to stay safe on the job. And here to share his insights on that, I'm very happy to welcome Joe Brandel, Business Development Manager for the North America Industry Safety Market at Mips. Joe, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for the invite.
Appreciate you coming on. Excited for the conversation. And I thought we could kind of start with the 10,000 foot view. You know, when you look at the landscape of head protection today, you know, what jumps out? What comes to mind for you?
Well, in head protection in the industrial market, there's definitely a movement towards better head protection. Thank goodness. That started several years ago, where folks are recognizing the risks associated with the work involved in the industrial marketplace. And so some employers have moved towards providing their employees with better head protection. And even OSHA, they came out with a safety and health bulletin more than 2 years ago, and they've decided to move into use an ANSI Type 2 protection for all of their employees. So it's a good thing. There's still plenty of work to do. There's still lots of opportunities for that, but we're definitely seeing a trend in the industrial marketplace towards better head protection.
Sure. Talk about more work to do. What are some of those gaps that you see, you know, in the market now, and the risks those can create for, you know, the workers who need that head protection?
Well, the researchers estimated the total annual cost for all construction-related injuries in the U.S. is more than $11.5 billion in 2002, and so of that, about $4 billion accounts for fatalities, while $7 billion accounts for non-fatal injuries. So mostly driven by, you know, cases away from work. So, you know, what they need to do is basically, you know, think of better protection and some of the risks that are associated with that risk. You know, like with rotational motion. You know, it's relatively unknown common traumatic or cause of traumatic brain injury here in the U.S., well, around the world. And, you know, it's a result of angled impacts to the head. You know, when a worker falls off a ladder and hits their head, it's most likely at an angle, and that can induce rotation into their brain. And so the brain is quite sensitive to that. And so those impacts need to be recognized and better protection for that opportunity.
You mentioned OSHA there, and, you know, recently moving towards, you know, different types of head protection, better head protection. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you know, regulations related to head protection as far as OSHA is concerned. You know, what folks out there should need to know about, you know, complying with OSHA head protection standards.
Well, first of all, you know, OSHA requires the employers to do a risk assessment based on, you know, the risks that are involved with their employees related to head injuries. So after they do that, you know, they need to provide, based on that risk assessment, head protection that complies with the ANSI standard, the Z89 or Z89.1, and various standards that are part of the OSHA standards. So they do need to comply with provide personal protective equipment, head protection that complies with that. And, you know, I know that ANSI is working on updating their standard. It's not out yet. It's not finalized, but hopefully that'll be out sometime this fall.
You mentioned the risk assessment there. You know, when you think about, you know, this for the safety professionals out there looking to provide, you know, the best head protection for their workforce, you know, what do they need to consider? You touched on it a little bit there, but what do they need to consider in that risk assessment process to ensure that, you know, they're going to be providing an effective level of protection?
Well, you know, first and foremost, you know, traditional hard hats have been around forever, you know, for over 100 years. And those traditional hard hats, and I'm talking about ANSI Type 1 hard hats, they protect for dropped objects that hit on top of the head. So that's one of the risks that can happen not only on construction sites, but industrial sites as well, you know, other situations. So, but they also need to, you know, provide protection for the risk associated with, you know, side and angled impacts as well, because like I said, that can induce rotational motion into the brain, and that's a leading cause of traumatic brain injury. So part of that assessment, again, you know, assessing the risk, whether it's working at heights, whether it's the slips, trips, and falls, any kind of situation where you might slip and hit your head, or like I said, fall from a height and hit your head. Those are very, you know, traumatic accidents that can cause serious brain injuries, especially when it induces rotational motion due to an angled impact instead of a linear impact to the head.
Talking about, sorry, getting kind of into the weeds here, but talking about those different impacts, and you talked like slips, trips, and falls, things like that. Is it really a matter of safety professionals looking at each individual task that a worker is going to be performing, and really thinking about what could go wrong and the impact that could have, as far as their head is concerned, and what they can do to help mitigate those hazards and risks?
Absolutely. There are obviously certain tasks, certain jobs within a job site or even a facility that are going to be higher risk. And, those that can cause the traumatic brain injury just due to the severity of the impact to the head are the ones that obviously, any protection needs to be provided for any kind of a potential head injury. And so the higher risk are the ones that induce that rotational motion to the brain due to angular impacts. And usually, like I said, that it could be an object that hits your head at an angle, or your head hitting an angle when you fall, or due to a slip, trip, or falling from height.
Talking about falling from heights, we talk about the OSHA moving towards safety helmets, and in the industry at large, does that really go back to fall protection? Is it, the move towards, helmets and away from traditional hard hats? Is that, the idea that if you fall off a building, your hard hat's going to fall off with you? So just providing, that better level of protection, something that's going to stay on you if you should experience a fall from height?
A lot of the fatalities are caused by, the head protection product, whatever it is, not staying on the worker's head during that fall. And, they impact their head, quite dramatically on an object or on the ground itself. And that can cause the traumatic brain injury. So absolutely, it's part of the process of not only, improving that protection with a better product, but keeping that product on your head.
I'm curious. I mean, we've talked a lot about on the show, like different types of PPE and, the maintenance, and they all experience wear and tear over time. What does that look like in the world of head protection? Looking at hard hats, helmets, whatever it might be, to ensure that it continues to provide that level of protection over weeks, months, years.
Well, inspection is critical, and that goes for any personal protective equipment, any safety equipment, whether it's glasses. Or your harness, gloves, your footwear. You need to inspect it prior to use. That's an OSHA requirement, and it's a requirement from all of the manufacturers as well. And it's important because you want to make sure that the product that is supposed to protect you is in good condition and in the situation able to do so. So inspection and even care after in between use is critical as well, because you have to make sure that it's in good, proper storage and all of that as well. But inspection is the key, and that's up to the user. All the training in the world means nothing if the user, the person using the personal protective equipment, isn't going to make sure that before they use it, it's been inspected and is in proper working condition.
And are there things in particular with head protection? I mean, obviously you've got a hard hat that's cracked or something like that, but are there things during that inspection process that folks should be looking for to ensure that it's going to provide that level of protection they need?
Absolutely. You mentioned one of them, any kind of a crack, any kind of a damage. But even, with some products, the sunlight, too much sunlight can affect their performance as well, because the UV rays could degrade the performance of the product. But, you're just looking for any sort of damage, whether it's the suspension inside of the helmet, or the foam, the padding, whatever kind of shock absorbing material, or if it's a low friction liner. Make sure that it's in good working condition, that it's installed correctly. Things can go wrong especially if you don't care for the product. If you're not, you may throw it around. It may fall out of your truck, or it may do whatever. Things happen. But again, that's why inspection is so critical, to make sure that it's in good condition.
And as you mentioned, storage, making sure you're taking care of it, off of the job site so that when you bring it to work, it's going to do what it needs to do. Kind of taking a broader look again. You talked about the current state of the industry and where things are going. But when you think about it, when it comes down to head protection, what do employers need to, and safety professionals need to know to improve safety among construction workers? I know you could have these helmets in any different environment, but what are some key takeaways you want folks to know to help improve safety among their team?
Well, just again, make sure during the risk assessment that you cover, as all the scenarios that you can when it comes to potential head protection and head trauma and accidents related to that. Make sure that you're educated about the proper the new protection that's out there. Again, like it was mentioned before, the angled impacts that cause rotation to the brain and can cause traumatic brain injury that way. They need to make sure that all of the risks are not, it's virtually impossible to cover all, but all of the major risks are covered with the product that they're providing.
So I just thought of this has come up in a lot of conversations when it comes to PPE is the importance of collaboration between your safety professionals, your procurement people, your suppliers, your workforce, because as we've talked about, proper fit is everything. It's not gonna be able to protect you if it doesn't fit right. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those relationships and how safety professionals can work with all those different groups to ensure that they're getting everybody on their team the equipment they need that's gonna fit properly.
Yeah, that's critical. I know that, like any personal protective equipment, the more advanced it is typically the costs are higher. So I understand there's challenges from a procurement or a budget process and standpoint. And, everybody that's involved in that process, and you mentioned them all, Scott, that, they all need to have buy-in, if you will. But, they all need to understand that, a hard hat or a helmet is reducing the risk of something very, traumatic happening. Head injuries are very expensive. According to OSHA's own risk calculator, just one concussion's worth $55,000, So, and we do get some pushback in the industry when you're advancing personal protective equipment. You'll hear a lot of, man, that's expensive. Our budget doesn't allow for that. If you think of it from that standpoint, does it allow for a I hate to just be dramatic, but a fatality or a traumatic brain injury? Because those are very expensive. And so, the cost up front may be higher than what was done in the past, but you're preventing a serious cost in the end. So absolutely, providing a product that your workers are going to wear and really understanding, helping them understand. And this goes back to the training, helping them understand why it's needed, why a chin strap's needed, why, protection from angled impacts, which cause rotational motion, why that's needed, why, we're moving from a type 2 or type 1 protective product to a type 2, and the linear impacts to the side and front and back of your head. All of that is through education. Not only for the workers, but, it could be, like you said, procurement. It could be, the safety folks, and education is constant in this industry. And, as research finds, more issues to solve and those solutions come about, again, that's why, you need to educate the folks that are using it, buying it, and, distributing it, and why it's needed.
I'm glad you mentioned training. That's a really important point. And, you touched on it a little bit there, but when you're talking about the workforce specifically, I mean, we hear stories, workers say, oh, a particular piece of PPE is going to get in my way or, hinder my productivity. It could be any number of things. What would you, stress to those folks about, why this is so important that, they know how to use it, that they need to wear it, number one, and they know how to use it properly?
Yeah, I think the hardest part is change, for most folks. I've been using this for 20 or 30 years or even 2 years. Why do I need to use this new thing? Or, it's different than what I've been using in the past. And again, I think if you explain to them, why, and maybe give examples of situations, talk about, unfortunately, sometimes we have to talk about accidents or, that included fatalities where a worker may have fallen off a ladder and his head protection product wasn't adequate and it fell off his head and that worker died. And, give them real world examples of that happening. And the product they're using now is made and designed to prevent that from happening if it's worn correctly. And then, go over the how and the why, how to use it, how to properly fit it, and, why exactly that those, features are needed. The chin strap, it seems logical, but, why you need a chin strap to keep that helmet on your head. It's definitely needed in the process.
And that kind of gets back to your earlier point too about making the business case for this. Yeah, you got to make the case to your workforce, but as you said, people say, this is expensive. It's like, well, if you have a serious injury or fatality, that could be even more expensive. So just strengthen that case for, to everybody or in your organization for why this is worth the investment, why you need to wear it on the job site.
Yeah, because if you think about it, most personal protective equipment is being used to prevent those things. That's the entire point of wearing it, whether it's a harness or a cut resistant glove or an eyewear. You're preventing those injuries that could possibly happen, and therefore, you're lowering the risk of it happening by using the more advanced personal protective equipment. And that's hard to, the hypotheticals of it possibly happening for some people are hard to imagine, but, it happens all the time. There's fatalities that happen throughout the United States every year, and far too many of them on the workforce.
Absolutely. And to your point at the top, that we have OSHA data and other data to back that up. I mean, obviously, the fatalities themselves, serious injury fatalities are awful enough, but the financial cost that goes along with those is astronomical when you put it all together.
Yeah, it is. And healthcare's gotten more expensive, just as it advances as well. So that's one of the things, again, one of the reasons why you're trying to prevent it is no one wants to see a worker or a coworker, an associate get hurt, obviously. I mean, but we also, a lot of companies don't want those expenses related to those accidents. And so, you do what you can to prevent it.
As we get ready to wrap up here, I wonder if we could kind of look to the future. We've talked kind of where things are at now, where they're moving it. What are trends that you're seeing that you would encourage safety professionals, employees out there to keep an eye on heading into the future?
Again, be open to the new technology, and I know some of those. The implementation for some folks is going to be difficult, with their workers being resistant to it. But again, look at the new technology, look as far as, protection, what it's protecting for, the risk associated, again, with angled impacts that can cause rotational motion to the brain, more as the technology advances, again, be open to it. And then, do your own research and find out what you think works for your folks and your employees and coworkers.
Well said. That's what it's all about. As we talked about with the, finding the right equipment, make sure it fits properly. It's all about finding the best equipment for your team. Well, Joe, I will give you the last word.
Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks again for inviting me. I appreciate the opportunity. And, as we work in the industry to advance head protection, we hope and we firmly believe that the injury rates and the fatality rates will continue to go down. And that's what we do it for. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely. That's what, the work of safety professionals is all about. And as I was thinking about today's conversation, hard hats and helmets are, synonymous with workplace safety. You see them in all kinds of work sites and they play a critical role. And I really appreciate you coming on and talking about how safety professionals can best provide the best head protection for their team. So thank you so much again.
You're welcome. And thanks for the invite.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you back here in 2 weeks.